Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 811, and today is June 18th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to break down on today's program, so I want to jump right into it. But first, if you have not already, head on over to the Kyle Anzalone Show YouTube channel and subscribe to the program. We are just, I believe, 5 subscribers now short of hitting the 1,000 mark. And of course, once we get there, it's going to open up some new possibilities for that program. And with all the wars and conflicts going on in the world, I basically need 2 shows to cover everything. And so help us out over at the Kyle Anzalone Show. Hit that goal, which I'm hoping that we could do by the end of the day. Hopefully by the time I have Dave DeCamp on the Kyle Anzalone Show later today at 4:45 Eastern, you're definitely going to want to catch that episode live. We will have a ton of important news to break down. But let's get into the headlines today. First up here, this article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on June 16th. Russian strikes damage Boeing building in Ukraine. So a large Russian drone and missile barrage damaged a Ukrainian building in Ukraine where Boeing operates. Last year, the American company in Kiev signed a memorandum agreeing to step up arms production. So this is according to the Financial Times, who spoke with Ukrainian officials and reviewed images that confirmed Boeing's building was damaged on Sunday night. The strike comes as the American arms maker has been building up a relationship with Kiev that would see more weapons produced in Ukraine. And so this is all, I think, really important, and to see where Russia is now looking to escalate this conflict, where this is an American firm. And so the Ukrainian foreign minister even appealed to Washington after this. And they said, look what Russia's doing. They're bombing American firms. This proves that America has to be more involved in Ukraine. When, of course, it's absolutely predictable that Russia would bomb these plants and any kind of defense company that's a Western defense company that's operating in Ukraine, because they're helping with the Ukrainian war effort. I'm sure that this is maybe not one of the first targets that Russia wanted to hit because of the potential for Washington responding with an escalation, stepping up their involvement in this conflict. At the same time, I'm sure Russia's looking to escalate this conflict in response to Operation Spiderweb, the Ukrainian attack in Russia that damaged Russian strategic bombers. And so this is probably a way for Russia to retaliate directly against the Ukrainian war effort, the industrial base, and also send a message to the West without hopefully escalating this conflict too much. It's important to note that Boeing and the Ukrainian Defense Ministry earlier this year engaged in discussions on stepping up the production of munitions and one-way, I believe, attack drones inside of Ukraine. And I always thought it was somewhat unlikely that there would be, at least as while the war was going on, any meaningful development to Ukraine's defense base, because we already see that Ukraine is struggling to defend with the air defense systems it has available its critical infrastructure. And so to build new weapons production plants would likely be very difficult to then have the air defenses to defend those sites. And my guess is in the coming days, we're going to see more anything related to Ukraine's defense base, industrial base, is going to be a potential attack for Russia. All right, moving on here. This article I wrote for JudgeNap.com on June 17th, and I will, at least over the next month or so, it's probably not a permanent thing, I'm going to be writing some additional articles for JudgeNap.com, in addition to what I'm writing for Antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. This one is titled, Israel Forces Killed Nearly 90 Palestinians Near Aid Distribution Sites in Gaza. So on Tuesday, at least 59 Palestinians were killed and hundreds were wounded attempting to receive aid near the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site in Khan Yunis. Israeli forces committed a second massacre near Rafah, killing about 30 people. The Israeli forces opened fire on desperate Palestinians seeking food, and aid has become a daily occurrence in Gaza. And in fact, the attack on the site near Khan Yunis apparently involved an Israeli tank, according to Reuters report, where they spoke with medics who were near the area and who witnessed the attack. Now, what is essentially happening here, maybe just to break it down a little bit more, the GHF sites in Gaza are secured by a private contracting firm. And while I'm not sure if the contractors themselves are American, the firms are American firms. And so, it's U.S. companies being paid to do this work. Now, on the way to these sites, because these sites aren't where people are, right? The Gazans had to travel at times kilometers to get to these aid distribution sites, and that's where they are encountering Israeli forces. And every day now, the Israelis are basically saying that if Palestinians congregate, which I guess means like maybe somebody's tired and stops, maybe a group of people get together and start asking questions about is how do we get to this aid distribution site, looking for other information, maybe information on relatives, friends that have been killed, information on their homes and if they may have been destroyed. There's plenty of reasons why Palestinians would want to stop and talk to each other or stop to take a rest. And when this happens, the Israelis are, especially if there's anywhere near in the eyesight of IDF troops, the Israelis are saying this presents a threat to our troops and therefore we're opening fire. And of course, it's completely absurd that a starving group of people who are unarmed would present any kind of threat to an Israeli tank, yet that's what Israel is doing. And I guess I really think it's to cause mass chaos, right? Once you have a famine situation, you make it difficult to get food, people's children are starving to death, that people are willing to go through and even potentially risk their lives in order to get food. It's also, I think, going to be something that causes a breakdown of society where not enough people are getting food, a minimal amount of food is being distributed, and so that's a part of what Israel is doing here. Additionally, it's putting a lot of strain on the medical system. And so one doctor told Doctors Without Borders, I saw people torn to pieces. It's a disaster. Seeking food should not be a death sentence. A second Doctors Without Borders emergency coordinator explained, in this horrific situation, nothing can replace the Nasser hospital, the last remaining lifeline in the south, but the hospital is over capacity and running on limited supplies. It's dangerously close to its breaking point. And so if the medical system shuts down in Gaza, again, this is going to be something that is going to lead to a breakdown of society, which is, I think, what Israel wants, to break the Palestinian culture, to break the will of the Palestinian people, so they all agree to march whatever direction the Israelis point them in, to the Sinai Peninsula, onto boats, onto planes, to be shipped off to third countries, and to, make, I guess, in some way, the ethnic cleansing of the Strip, the agreement to leave a willful decision by the Palestinians, because the Israelis have just humiliated, starved, and deprived them of everything needed to life, to the point where they're willing to leave. And again, these incidents are happening daily. So the 90 Palestinians killed near aid sites on Tuesday follows the murder of at least 38 Palestinians near aid sites on Monday. All right, so next up here, this one from our friend Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israeli officials say war with Iran is premised on the idea of the U.S. entering. And of course, we've known this all along on the show. Basically, Israel bit off more than they could chew with this war on Iran. They do have the capability to decimate Iran, decimate Tehran, hit residential facilities, hospitals, media buildings, as we'll see coming up here, plenty of civilian targets, and also military targets as well. But Iran is a country of 92 million people. It's a very large country. It has a lot of nuclear infrastructure, some of which is buried very deeply below the ground, and it would take the American help to take out those facilities. So the Israeli official told CNN the whole operation is premised on the fact that the U.S. will join at some point, and what they need from the U.S. is our B-2 heavy bomber, I believe it's B-52 heavy bombers, as well as our 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs in order to destroy the Fordo nuclear enrichment site that, again, Iran has buried deep underground. It does seem that Donald Trump is really edging towards making the decision to enter the conflict. Now, from Israeli officials, from American politicians, they say they had to start this war. They had to get involved because, and they will say that Iran was on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon. And had Iran developed that nuclear weapon, then it would have presented a massive threat to Tel Aviv. And so that's the reason that Tel Aviv had to go ahead and launch the war against Iran. And we have American officials now making it clear that that's not true. This is another article I wrote for Judge Knapp. U.S. intel, Iran was up to 3 years away from a nuclear weapon. So, CNN published a report on Tuesday that said, when Israel launched its series of strikes against Iran last week, it also issued a number of dire warnings about the country's nuclear program, suggesting Iran was fast approaching a point of no return in its quest to obtain a nuclear weapon, and that strikes were necessary to preempt that outcome. But U.S. intelligence assessment had reached a different conclusion. Not only was Iran not pursuing a nuclear weapon, it was also up to 3 years away from being able to produce and deliver one to a target of its choosing, according to 4 people familiar with the assessment. And so what this is saying is that Iran had not decided to build a nuclear weapon. But if Iran decided to build a nuclear weapon tomorrow, it would take up to 3 years to do so. And Iran was actively engaged in talks with the U.S. that would ensure that they were not and would not have the capabilities to build a nuclear weapon when Israel attacked Iran, killing the talks. And so it's very clear that this was a war of choice, that this was an offensive, not a preemptive, unprovoked war waged by Israel against Iran. They didn't have to go to war, and they chose to. Now, this should be one thing, and it shouldn't be the biggest issue for the United States of America that Israel has gone to war with Iran. However, it is becoming increasingly clear that American politicians, including our president, believe Israel over our own intelligence community when it comes to how close Iran was to making a nuclear bomb. On the first conflicts of interest this week, I had an article where I broke down the reaction of U.S. congressmen to the Israeli attack on Iran. And one of the notable themes was politician after politician on both sides of the aisle claiming that Israel had no choice and America must enter this conflict because Iran was on the brink of building a nuclear weapon, which obviously from this assessment, from everything we know, is simply untrue. So the source added, and this is also important, that Tel Aviv's aggressive war against Iran has only made a minor difference in extending the amount of time it would take Tehran to break out and develop a nuclear weapon. And so while it was already going to take 3 years, they've only extended that by a matter of months. And so now it may take 3 years and 3 months, which again, Iran wasn't attempting to build a nuclear weapon anyways. And so the best way to prevent Iran from ever even wanting to obtain a nuclear weapon was to enter a nuclear deal rather than carrying out these strikes, which may put Iran in a position where not only do they want to make a nuclear weapon, they are going to prioritize that with all aspects of their state because they will see that as the only way to stop the Israeli attacks on the Islamic Republic. Now, one more thing here, Donald Trump was asked about this and Tulsi Gabbard's assessment that Israel wasn't trying to make a nuclear bomb aboard Air Force One on Monday, and Trump replied, "I don't care what she said, I think they were very close to having one." And so is Trump just believing everything Netanyahu says? That's a possibility. Is Trump just believing whatever he wants to believe? That's possible too. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, why Trump's making this assessment, but it's clear that his assessment is just bafflingly wrong, and it's about to wind the U.S. up in Israel's war of offense in Iran. So next up here, Senator Tim Kaine induces war powers resolution to prevent war with Iran. This is the one that's been introduced in the Senate. There's another one that was introduced in the House by Reps Massey and Ro Khanna. I've seen AOC and quite a few others say they are for this. The problem with introducing a war powers resolution to try to stop the president is I imagine that just trying to get the 50 votes and half the votes in the House would be quite difficult already. But Donald Trump, during his first administration, vetoed a war powers resolution when it came to the war in Yemen. And so this means that to make this war powers resolution stick, that Congress would have to have 2/3 majority in each house to override the president, and there's no way they're going to end up getting that. And so it's I think this could be a good talking point. This could be something that draws Americans' attention to the issue. I don't think it's actually going to prevent the U.S. from getting involved in the war if Trump wants to. Now, let's look at what Trump is saying. This one, another article I wrote for Judge Knapp, June 17th. Trump demands Iran's unconditional surrender. So in a series of Truth Social posts, President Trump claimed Iran was close to obtaining a nuclear weapon, threatened the life of the Iranian supreme leader, and demanded Tehran agree to an unconditional ceasefire, basically setting the stage for the U.S. to have to enter this conflict because Iran has no way to end this war if their leader is being threatened, and the demand from the other side is unconditional surrender. So the first of these three posts was sent out on Tuesday by Trump. It said, "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old US of A." I think there is some truth to this about Israel having control over the skies of Iran. And but I'm not sure, to what extent that's true. It may be true that they have control over the skies of Western Iran, over Tehran, not so much over the east of the country. But, I don't have the exact breakdown at this point to be able to say confidently to what degree this is true. It's also notable that Trump wrote "we," implying the U.S. and Israel control Iran's airspace. While Trump has given Tel Aviv defensive support in arms, this post makes it sound like Washington is engaged in offensive operations in Iran. Now, the next post, Trump threatened the life of the Iranian supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He said, "We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He's an easy target, but is safe there. We're not going to take him out, kill him, at least not yet. But we don't want missile shot civilians, American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for the attention to this matter." And I guess what he's referring to is, as Iran is being bombed repeatedly by Israel, the Iranians are also launching missiles back at Israel. And Trump is saying that because some of these missiles are hitting civilian sites, and my guess is that Iran is probably willing to, go along with at least some gray area targeting of civilian sites. And so this would include like ports, airports, and things like that. There's also a lot of air defenses being shot over the skies of Israel. And, maybe Iranian missiles are being partially disabled, moved off course, or being manipulated for electronic warfare and hitting civilian targets for that reason. And Trump is saying that if this continues, we're going to take out the supreme leader. Again, a very concerning statement. However, the worst of these was Trump's last post that simply said "unconditional surrender" in all caps with an exclamation point. And doing so is just going to be a non-starter for Tehran. This means giving up their missile programs, all their geopolitical ambitions in the Middle East. Again, this is something that no country will agree to, particularly not one under attack, and one that is, for as much as Iran is on the receiving end and apparently has lost control of a lot of their airspace, the Iranians are giving it and hitting Israel pretty hard at this point. And so the idea that Tehran would just agree to an unconditional surrender at this point is completely ludicrous, when Iran may be willing to agree to de-escalate or end this conflict under the right terms. Trump is simply making it clear to the Islamic Republic that we're not interested in that on our side. When it comes to killing the supreme leader, it seems to be a divide, at least in the public statements, between Netanyahu and Donald Trump. Of course, it's important to remember that there was this apparent divide between Trump and Netanyahu leading up to the Israeli attack on Iran. And the message that we have received since the attack began, at least from the Israeli side, is that no, all of this was coordinated between the two sides, and the perceived split between Trump and Netanyahu was manufactured for the public, and particularly for Iran's consumption, and not any real split between the two leaders. A similar thing could be happening here. I'm not sure, but we do have Netanyahu arguing that killing the Ayatollah would end the conflict, and Trump vetoing the decision to do so. I'm not sure how this one's going to play out, or how these two sides are going to work that out. Want to talk about one of the more nefarious Israeli attacks on Iran. This article was written at judgenap.com on June 16th. Israel bombs Iranian television studio while anchor is live on air. And so this was the Iranian state military building that was bombed by Israel. I do have a video embedded in this article here where the female news anchor is live on air. She's giving a report. She's saying that bombs are starting to hit the facility, and then you can see her fleeing as smoke starts to fill the room. Video and images from outside show that the headquarters of the Islamic Republic of Iran broadcasting in Tehran was on fire. And again, this is just an Israeli attack on a clearly civilian target. And the Israeli Defense Ministry has admitted that, yes, this was the target of the attack. It wasn't thrown off. It wasn't that there was some secret facility underneath that Israel had to bomb. No, they were trying to take out the journalists. And this is something that Israel did very prominently in Gaza. Over 230 members of the media have been killed in Gaza. They killed journalists in Lebanon as well. Killing the journalists allows them to more accurately control the narrative. If the people of Iran can't get their message out, can't report to the West what Israel is hitting when they're blowing up civilian residential targets, then Israel gets to just dominate the narrative. And I believe that's what Israel's goal here is. Now, additionally, Katz said Tehran will be treated like Beirut, and the remark is a reference to the Dalia Doctrine, which was developed by Tel Aviv during the 2006 Lebanon War, and the policy calls for using overwhelming force against civilian targets to break the determination of the targeted people in government and get them to agree to end the conflict. And so again, this is Israel explicitly attacking civilian targets in order to get what they want. Next up here, U.S. sends refueling additional aircraft carriers to bolster Middle East force. This one, Dave DeCamp, June 16th, antiwar.com. The U.S. has deployed a significant number of refueling aircraft to Europe to give President Trump more options in the Middle East related to Iran-Israel war, another sign that the U.S. may directly enter the war and launch strikes on Iran. On Sunday, 31 KC-135s and KC-46s and other tanker aircraft were spotted departing the U.S. and heading east, fueling speculation online that the U.S. may be preparing for military action against Iran. On top of the massive refueling deployment, the U.S. also redirected the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz to the region, which will join the USS Carl Vinson, making it the second aircraft carrier strike group in the region. Now, my guess is that if the U.S. were to bomb Iran, it would probably use the strategic bombers, the B-52s that are B-2s and B-52s that are deployed to Diego Garcia out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but they may need refueling help, especially if there's any fighter aircraft that take part in the attack, in which case those refuelers could probably come from Europe and don't have to come necessarily from Diego Garcia. All right, next article up here, one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on June 17th. Poll: Republicans oppose involvement in Israel's war. Americans want talks with Iran. So a new poll shows that a majority of Americans want President Trump to engage in negotiations with Iran and do not want Washington to support Tel Aviv's offensive war against the Islamic Republic. So the survey, conducted by YouGov and The Economist, following the unprovoked Israeli attack on Iran, found 60% of Americans do not want Trump to enter the newest conflict in the Middle East, compared to just 16% of voters who want Washington to aid Tel Aviv's military operations. Even among Americans who voted for Trump in 2024, only 19 support entering the conflict. A majority of Republicans say they want Washington to stay out of the war. And I think it's interesting that with all of this, there was really no demographic group in the entire poll that supported carrying out the strikes, and about the same number that opposed getting involved want to see the conflict ended and a nuclear deal reached with Iran. All right, this next article here. Netanyahu seeks to stop Israelis from fleeing his war. This is an article I wrote for JudgeNap.com, and I really haven't seen it reported or discussed anywhere else. And so I want to spend a minute kind of talking about this story. Basically what's going on here. And of course it made sense that after the Iranians started responding to the Israeli attack, that the Ben Gurion airport in Israel was shut down. However, the Israeli Transportation Ministry is now working on flights, and they're going to have 2 flights coming in every hour. They're going to call them repatriation flights of citizens who were outside Israel when the war began, who are deemed essential to the country and are now being brought back in. However, the Tel Aviv has instructed airlines that when those flights land, not to allow Israeli citizens to leave on the outgoing flights. And in fact, they've, I guess, had some arguments with the Americans and the Russians on if U.S. and Russian citizens would be allowed to leave Israel. I think this is Netanyahu basically making sure that he has human shields. There are hundreds of thousands of American Israelis, and I guess just probably American citizens that live in Israel. And so if any of those Americans are killed, this would be a pretext for America directly entering the conflict. And to keep as many civilians and Americans there as possible is probably very important for Tel Aviv. Israel is also a country with general conscription into their military, and so if there are a substantial number of young Israelis outside of the country or looking to leave the country, that could hamper Tel Aviv's ability to mobilize troops. And just in general, Israel isn't a very big country. I think 10 million people, and 40% of Israelis were already considering leaving Israel before this attack started. And so if there are a lot of people that want to leave, just demographics wise, that would be a massive setback for Israel and really hurt their efforts to expand their borders and fight all these wars. This next one is relatively crazy. Trump shares private text message from Mike Huckabee that compared the Iran situation to Truman in 1945. And this message said, God spared you in Butler, PA, to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decision on your shoulders, I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking to you, sir, but there is only one that matters, his voice. And of course, he's talking about God there. I am your appointed servant in the land and am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I do not reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment sought you. And I really do worry that this is the kind of message that could be very persuasive to Donald Trump to get him to agree to directly enter this conflict. All right, and the last article up here today, Germany's chancellor says Israel is doing dirty work for us in Iran. So German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has strongly backed Israel's war on Iran and said Tuesday that Israel was doing the dirty work for the West by launching this assault. It is certainly dirty work. It just doesn't benefit the West. That's where Merz gets it wrong and gets it right. It's dirty, but it's not going to benefit the West. This is for Israel, and it's the West that is aiding Israel in doing its bidding here, trying to expand its borders and attack all kinds of countries. All right, that will wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, check out the Kyle Anzalone show later today, 4:45 with Dave DeCamp.